The town of Briar's End stood alone against the wide Wyoming sky. Its buildings weathered but proud, its people stubborn in their beliefs. They had made a promise years ago, after one too many funerals and one too many bodies swinging from makeshift gallows. No more hangings, not in their town, not ever again. At the center of that promise stood Sheriff James Carter. James wasn't the kind of lawman the dime novels celebrated. He didn't swagger, he didn't shoot first. He didn't keep a rope coiled on his saddle. Instead, he carried a worn leather Bible in his saddlebag, and a pair of iron cuffs polished from use. He believed in trials, in jail cells, in sending men to the territorial court alive. Justice ain't revenge, he often said, and it sure as hell ain't a spectacle. Some folks respected him for it. Others whispered that Briar's End had grown soft. The whispers grew louder the day Natasha Vale rode into town. She arrived at dusk, the horizon bleeding orange behind her. Dust clung to her black coat, and her dark hair was tied back tight, as if she meant to keep the world at a distance. The horse beneath her was lathered and tired. So was she. Natasha had been many things in her life: outlaw, hired gun, survivor. She carried her past like a second shadow. In Dodge City, they'd called her Red Hand Vale. In Abilene, they'd posted a reward for her capture. She had left behind more graves than she cared to count. But Briar's End was meant to be a new beginning. James saw her before anyone else did. He was leaning against the porch post of the sheriff's office when she rode in. He knew the look of someone running from something. He'd worn it once himself. "You looking to stay?" he asked evenly, as she dismounted. "Just passing through," Natasha replied. Her voice was low, guarded. He studied her holster, the careful way her hand hovered near it without touching. "We don't tolerate trouble here." She met his eyes then. There was steel in hers. "Neither do I." It might have ended. Their two wary souls, circling each other, if not for the rider, who thundered in an hour later. 3 men followed, dust rising like smoke behind them. Their leader wore a red bandana around his throat and a cruel smile on his face. "Evenin', Sheriff." The man called names: Clyde Mercer. "I'm here for the woman." Natasha stiffened. James stepped forward. "This is Briar's End. You got business. You state it, peaceful." Mercer spat into the dirt. "She killed my brother." Natasha didn't deny it. The townsfolk began to gather, unease rippling through them. They had worked too hard to build a town without a gallows. They didn't want blood in the streets. James held Mercer's gaze. "You got proof. You bring it to court. You don't drag folks out in the dirt." Mercer laughed. "Court, she don't deserve a judge. She deserves a rope." A murmur spread through the crowd. Natasha stepped forward. "If you want me, come take me." Her hand moved faster than most men could blink. James saw it before it happened, the old instinct flashing across her face. Violence was easier, cleaner. He stepped between them. "No," he said firmly. Mercer sneered. "You plannin' to protect her." "I'm plannin' to protect this town," James replied. The air tightened like a drawn wire. Hands hovered over holsters. A single shot could shatter everything Briar's End stood for. James slowly removed his badge and held it up. "In this town, we don't hang folks without trial, and we don't settle scores with bullets in the street. You want justice, Mercer? You'll get it. Lawful." Mercer's smile faded. "You're a fool, Sheriff." "Maybe," James said quietly. "But I'm a fool who's still The standoff stretched long enough for the sun to sink fully behind the hills. Finally, Mercer tugged his horse around. "This ain't over," he warned. As the riders disappeared into the dark, Natasha turned to James. "You shouldn't have done that." He met her gaze calmly. "You shouldn't have given them reason." Silence settled between them, thick with unspoken histories. Briar's End had made its promise years ago. Now, that promise would be tested, and neither Natasha nor James knew how much blood the past was still willing to spill. The morning after Clyde Mercer rode out of Briar's End, the town felt different. Fear has a way of settling into the cracks of wooden sidewalks and between the slats of barn doors. It lingers in half-spoken sentences, and in the way people avoid each other's eyes. That morning, Briar's End was heavy with it. James Carter noticed it in the silence. Usually, the bakery opened before sunrise, and Mrs. Holloway's laughter drifted down Main Street like church bells. The blacksmith's hammer rang steady and sure. But now, conversations hushed when James passed. A few men stood outside the saloon, arms folded, glancing toward the jailhouse. They weren't looking at him, they were looking at Natasha. She had spent the night in one of the 2 jail cells, not locked in, but not entirely free either. James had offered her the cot in his office. She refused. "I've slept in worse," she'd said. Now she sat on the edge of the cot, staring at her hands. They were steady. That bothered her more than if they'd shaken. James stepped inside with 2 tin cups of coffee. "You're not my prisoner," he said, handing her one. "Feels like I am," Natasha replied. He leaned against the bars. "If Mercer's telling the truth, there'll be bounty hunters soon enough. I can't ignore that." She met his gaze. "I killed his brother." James didn't flinch. "Why?" Natasha hesitated, and for the first time since riding into town, the steel in her eyes wavered. "He was part of a gang," she said quietly. "They burned a homestead outside Abilene. Family inside. I tracked them for 3 weeks." Her jaw tightened. "He reached for his gun first." "Did he?" James asked. She didn't answer right away. "He would have." That was the problem. James understood that kind of thinking. He had lived it once, back when he wore a cavalry uniform, and thought violence could solve anything if you were fast enough. "I don't doubt he was a bad man," James said. "But killing him didn't end anything, did it?" "No," she admitted. Outside, a voice rose sharply. James stepped to the window and saw a small crowd gathering near the well. Mercer had left, but he'd left something behind ajar. Some of the townsmen were arguing with old Mr. Bennett, one of the founders of Briar's End. "She's trouble," a man shouted. "You heard Mercer. If we don't deal with her, they'll come back in force, and we'll deal with them." "Lawful," Bennett snapped. "Lawful," another scoffed. "Sometimes the rope's the only law that works." Natasha stood. "There it is," she murmured. James stepped outside before the argument could grow teeth. "That's enough," he called. The men turned to him. One of them, a rancher named Cole Harding, stepped forward. "We built this town to protect our families," Cole said. "You're risking all of it for a killer." James didn't raise his voice. "This town wasn't built on fear. It was built on restraint. And what if restraint gets someone killed?" Cole shot back. The question hung in the air. James glanced back at the jailhouse. Natasha stood in the doorway now, hands at her sides, unarmed, watching. "If she's guilty of a crime," James said steadily, "she face a judge in Cheyenne, alive." Cole's jaw tightened. "And if Mercer comes back with 20 men, then we defend ourselves," James said. "But we don't string someone up to feel safe." A few murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Not many, but enough. Cole shook his head and walked off. The crowd slowly dispersed. Natasha stepped beside James. "You're going to lose this town," she said softly. "They're scared, I know. And fear makes people reach for rope." He looked at her. "Then help me." She blinked. "Stay," James said. "Tell your story. Stand in front of them without a gun. Show them you're more than your past." Natasha let out a bitter laugh. "You think words matter. In Briar's End, they do." She studied the faces, watching from windows and porches. Suspicious, worried, tired. She had spent years surviving by drawing first, shooting straight, and leaving before consequences caught up. Staying was harder. "Mercer won't stop," she warned. "I know. And if he comes back," James met her gaze, unwavering. "Then we prove a town doesn't need a gallows to stand its ground." Natasha looked down at her hands again. For the first time in years, she wondered what it would mean not to use them for violence. And for the first time in just as long, she wasn't sure she could. 3 days passed without word from Clyde Mercer. That silence was worse than gunfire. Briar's End went about its business, but it did so cautiously. The schoolhouse windows were shuttered early. Ranch hands rode in pairs instead of alone. At night, lamps burned longer in the sheriff's office. Natasha stayed, true to James's request. She walked the streets, unarmed. It felt like walking without skin. Children stared at her, some curious, some afraid. A woman gathering laundry crossed to the opposite side of the road. At the general store, conversation stopped the moment she stepped inside. James watched it all unfold, with a quiet steadiness that both frustrated and unsettled her. "You don't defend me," she told him one evening, as they stood outside the jailhouse, watching the sun dip behind the hills. "I am defending you," James replied, "by letting them glare holes through me, by letting them see you're human." Natasha scoffed. "Human's not what they think I am. Then show them different." But showing was harder than surviving. That night, the silence finally broke. Gunshots cracked through the darkness. 3 riders burst into town just before midnight, firing into the air and sending horses screaming in their stalls. One of them lit a torch and hurled it toward the livery stable roof. James was already running. Natasha moved on. Instinct then caught herself. Her hand twitched toward where her revolver would have been. It wasn't there. James fired one warning shot into the air. "Drop it," he shouted. The torch clattered onto the dirt before it could catch. A stable boy kicked sand over it. One of the riders tore off his bandana. It wasn't Mercer. It was Cole Harding. "You forced this," Cole yelled. "You made us weak." 2 other men from town flanked him, faces twisted by fear and anger. Natasha froze. This wasn't Mercer's doing. This was Briar's end, breaking from within. James stepped forward slowly, gun still raised, but not aimed. "Cole," he said evenly, "this ain't justice. This is panic. She's bringing wolves to our door." Cole shouted, gesturing toward Natasha. "We should have hung her when we had the chance." The word hung. Several townsfolk gathered at a distance, eyes wide. The old promise trembled on the edge of collapse. Natasha felt the familiar heat rising in her chest. The pull of violence, the easy solution. 3 armed men, 1 clean draw, end it. James shifted slightly, placing himself between her and Cole. "You hang her," James said calmly. "And what happens when Mercer comes anyway? You think blood satisfies blood?" Cole hesitated. James lowered his gun. That single motion shocked everyone. "If you believe she's guilty," James continued, "then we hold a trial, right here, open and honest. Let the town decide whether we send her to Cheyenne or set her free." "A trial." One of the other men muttered. "We ain't got a judge," Cole said. "We've got each other," James replied. "And we've got our word." Silence spread across the street. Natasha stared at him. He was offering her up to the town, not to hang, but to judge. It terrified her more than bullets. "You'd risk that," she whispered. James didn't look at her. "Justice don't work in shadows." Cole's grip on his rifle loosened. "You'd let her stand trial?" he asked the crowd. Murmurs rippled. Old Mr. Bennett stepped forward. "That's what we promised. No rope without trial." A woman from the bakery nodded slowly. "Let her speak." The tension shifted, not gone, but redirected. Cole finally lowered his weapon. "Tomorrow," he said. "High noon." The riders turned their horses and disappeared into the dark. The crowd dispersed slowly, unease lingering like smoke. Natasha turned to James once they were alone. "You don't know what you've done," she said quietly. "Yes, I do. If they decide against me, then I'll take you to Cheyenne myself," he said. "Alive." She searched his face for doubt and found none. "Why?" she demanded. "Why fight so hard for someone like me?" James finally looked at her. "Because if we fail tonight," he said softly, "this town becomes like every other one you've run from." Natasha felt something unfamiliar tighten in her chest. Hope and fear. High noon would decide more than her fate. It would decide whether Briar's end truly meant what it claimed. A town without a gallows, or just a town waiting for an excuse to build one. By the time the church bell rang for noon, the entire town of Briar's End had gathered in the square. They didn't bring a gallows, but someone had brought a coil of rope. It sat on a crate near the well, silent, coiled like a sleeping snake. No one claimed it. No one touched it. Yet everyone saw it. Natasha stood at the center of the square, unarmed, hands visible at her sides. The Wyoming sun bore down on her shoulders, but she refused to bow her head. James stood beside her, not in front. It mattered. "This ain't a spectacle," James announced, his voice steady. "This is a hearing. We'll speak truth, and we'll decide lawful." Cole Harding stepped forward first. "She killed a man," he said bluntly. "Clyde Mercer's brother. That much is admitted." All eyes shifted to Natasha. "Yes," she said clearly. "I killed him." A murmur rippled. James didn't interrupt. Cole continued. "Then what more do we need?" "Murder's murder." Natasha inhaled slowly. This was the moment James had asked of her to speak, not shoot. "His name was Eli Mercer," she said. "He rode with the Dry Creek gang. They burned a homestead outside Abilene. A woman and 2 boys died inside." Gasps sounded. "I tracked them," she continued. 3 weeks. When I found them, Eli reached for his gun." "You don't know that," Cole snapped. "I do," Natasha said firmly. "Because I hesitated." Silence fell. She swallowed hard. "I told him to drop it." He smiled. James watched her closely. This wasn't the hardened outlaw the world knew. This was a woman carrying ghosts. "I shot first," she said, "because I was tired of burying innocent people." A woman near the front, Mrs. Holloway from the bakery, stepped forward. "Were you a lawwoman?" she asked. "No." "Were you dead?" "No." "Then what gave you the right?" Natasha faltered. "Nothing," she admitted. The honesty hung heavy. Cole seized on it. There, she played judge and executioner. Natasha nodded once. "I did." The square seemed to shrink around her. James stepped forward slightly. "Is there anyone here who's killed in defense?" he asked. A ranch hand raised his hand slowly. Another. Then a third. The West was not gentle. James nodded. "We've all drawn lines in the dirt. The question is whether we believe in something better now." He turned to Natasha. "If this town chooses to send you to Cheyenne for formal trial, will you go peacefully?" She looked at him. He was giving her an out. A lawful path. No running. No blood. "Yes," she said. "And if they choose to let you stay," her voice wavered for the first time, "then I stay. Without a gun." A murmur spread again, but different this time. Mrs. Holloway crossed her arms. "You'd give up carrying?" "Yes." Cole scoffed. "And when Mercer comes back," Natasha met his glare. "If he comes for me, I won't hide behind your families." James felt something shift in the crowd. Not forgiveness, but understanding. Old Mr. Bennett stepped forward slowly. "We founded this town after my son was lynched in Kansas," he said, voice trembling. "No trial, no hearing, just rope." He gestured to the coil on the crate. "We swore never again." The square went still. Cole looked at the rope. Then at Natasha. "If we let her stay," he said quietly, "and Mercer comes, we all bleed." James answered softly, "Or we stand together." The silence stretched long and fragile. Finally, Mrs. Holloway spoke. "No gallows," she said. Another voice joined. "No hanging." Then another. Cole closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. "She goes to Cheyenne," he said. "Lawful trial. No rope." James nodded once. "Agreed." All eyes turned to Natasha. She felt an unexpected sting in her throat. No one had reached for the rope. Not one. James placed gentle cuffs on her wrists, not as punishment, but as promise. "I'll ride with you at dawn," he said quietly. She searched the crowd again. They weren't smiling, but they weren't calling for her death. For the first time in years, Natasha felt the weight of justice without blood, and it was heavier than any gun she'd ever carried. Dawn broke, soft and pale, over Briar's End. The town gathered quietly as Sheriff James prepared the horses. Natasha stood beside him, wrists loosely cuffed in front of her. The metal was cool against her skin, but it did not burn like shame. It felt different, earned, fair. James adjusted the saddle straps and handed her a canteen. "It's a 2-day ride to Cheyenne," he said. "We'll make camp by Dry Creek." Natasha gave a faint nod. She had ridden to Dry Creek once before, on a hunt filled with fury. Now she would ride there in surrender. Life had a strange sense of balance. As they mounted, A rider appeared at the edge of town. Then, another, and another. Dust rose, in a long, ominous line, across the prairie. Clyde Mercer had returned. This time, he had more than 3 men. The townsfolk stiffened. Mothers pulled children close. Cole Harding reached for his rifle. Mercer rode straight into the square, his gaze locking on to Natasha. "You think I'd let this end with a hearing?" he sneered. "You think I care about your little town rules?" James dismounted slowly. "She's coming with me to Cheyenne," he said evenly. "Lawful trial." Mercer laughed harshly. "I ain't here for court." His men fanned out, rifles visible. The tension snapped tight. Natasha felt it, the old instinct roaring back to life. Her hands flexed inside the cuffs. If she could just... James stepped in front of her. "No," he murmured, without turning. Mercer's eyes narrowed. "I'm gonna stand for what we built," James replied. Cole moved beside the sheriff, then Mrs. Holloway's son, then the ranch hands. One by one, the people of Briar's End formed a line. No rope, no gap, just townsfolk standing shoulder to shoulder. Mercer hesitated. He hadn't expected unity. "You're protecting a killer," he spat. James shook his head. "We're protecting law." Mercer's gaze flicked to Natasha. "You got anything to say?" She stepped forward, as far as the cuffs allowed. "I killed your brother," she said clearly, "and I'll answer for it in court. But I won't answer to a rope." Silence followed. Mercer's men shifted uneasily. This wasn't the chaos they'd ridden in for. There was no mob to stir, no fear to exploit, just a town refusing to bend. James's voice was steady. "You fire the first shot, Mercer, and you prove exactly why we don't hang without trial." The wind moved through the square, lifting dust in soft spirals. Mercer studied the line of townsfolk. They weren't trembling, they weren't shouting, they were resolved. Finally, he cursed under his breath and tugged his reins. "This ain't finished," he warned. James met his glare. "It will be in court." Mercer turned his horse sharply and rode out, his men following behind him. The dust slowly settled. No shots fired, no bodies dropped, no rope tightened. The town of Briar's End had faced violence and answered with restraint. Natasha felt something inside her shift, something she hadn't believed possible. For years, she had thought strength meant drawing faster, striking harder, surviving alone. But this was strength. James unlocked her cuffs. "Be still willing to ride?" he asked softly. "Yes," she said. Cole stepped forward awkwardly. "You come back cleared," he muttered. "You'll find work here." Mrs. Holloway nodded. "Everyone deserves a chance to be better than yesterday." Natasha swallowed hard. James mounted his horse and extended a hand to help her up. This time, she didn't hesitate. As they rode out of Briar's End together, the town watched not with fear, but with quiet pride. They had kept their promise. They had refused the rope. They had chosen justice over spectacle. And somewhere along the long road to Cheyenne, Natasha realized she wasn't riding away from her past anymore. She was riding toward something new. Beside her, James glanced over. "Funny thing," he said lightly. "Most towns build their identity on what they're willing to fight for." Natasha offered the faintest smile. "Yours built it on what it refuses to do." Behind them, Briar's End stood firm against the wide Wyoming sky, a town without a gallows, without a hanging, and without regret. And if you believe in stories where justice doesn't need a rope, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more Western stories.